Okay, great. So we'll kickstart the session 5 of our knowledge series, How to Build a Successful Online First Digital Brand. And in the morning, Sundar from Social Beat introduced you to the world of digital advertising and actually taught you how to, do the basics of running paid ads on different platforms. Now we have a digital marketing expert, Mr. Veda Narayanan, Vedantam from Razorpay, who will be sharing the marketing tips and tricks which will be to organically drive the business growth. And I understand some of you weren't able to, join our previous sessions. So please don't worry. We will be sharing the recordings and everything with you after the all 6 sessions are completed. And also just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Zoom chat box and we will have time for the questions at the end of the session. And also I want to do a quick sound check. I hope you are able to hear me. If there is anything, chat us in and we will try to resolve it. So without any further ado, I would like to start the session and we will start the session which is presented by Mr. Veda Narayanan from Razorpay. And hi, Mr. Veda Narayanan.
Hi, Ria. Very good evening to all of the participants. How are you doing?
So why don't you give a brief intro of yourself and also share your knowledge with our audience today?
Sure. Thank you for having me over, Ria, and to the entire DigiGrad team.
Thank you.
A
Yeah.
very good evening to all of the participants who've made it here on a Saturday evening. Hope all of you are safe and sound. Your loved ones are safe and sound. Your co-workers, your employees, for all the entrepreneurs, I hope everybody's safe and sound. I know we live in pretty unprecedented times, and I hope everybody's doing really well from a health perspective. As Ria mentioned, my name is Vedana Ryan and I take care of the SME and the startup business practice at Razorpay, take care of both marketing and sales. Previously led marketing for multiple e-commerce companies in health tech, in ed tech, in travel tech. I also serve as a marketing mentor with various startup acceleration programs across the country, various TIE chapters, Atal Innovation Mission of the Government of India, multiple entrepreneurship cells with various B schools. I serve as a marketing mentor there. I also serve as an adjunct visiting faculty member with various top B schools in the country. I am Bangalore, Indore, and Kashipur, to name a few. Very excited to be here. And once again, thank you so much for the opportunity. Let me just quickly share my screen. Is everyone able to see my screen all right?
Yes.
Yeah, is my screen visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Awesome. Okay, so what we're going to do is over the next hour and a half or so, 75, 90 minutes, the way we can structure the session, something that Ria mentioned earlier, I'll try to cover the content in around 75 to 90 minutes. I believe we have a couple of hours slotted. So we'll cover the content in 75, 90 minutes and we can leave the last 30, 40 minutes or so for Q&A. Over the next 75, 90 minutes or so, these are the points we're going to be covering. We're going to look at a couple of very interesting digital inflection points that happened during the year 2020 that kind of slipped below the radar, so to speak. I'm not going to bore you with the regular data points on the growth of India's internet economy, which is something that all of us are aware of. We know that India is amongst the world's top 3 internet economies in terms of size and rate of growth. I'm not going to bore you with that. But we're going to talk about a couple of very interesting digital inflection points, which kind of slipped past unnoticed. And then we look at what has been the impact of the pandemic on the startup and the SME ecosystem. And we at Razorpay have the opportunity to actually have a ringside perspective of what's happening in the entire startup and SME ecosystem, because we process the end-to-end money movement for a lot of startups and SMEs, both inward and outward. So I'll give you a quick sense, a sneak peek into the impact that the pandemic has made on the startup ecosystem. And then what we're going to do is we look at this entire, the remainder of the presentation, we'll divide it into a couple of different halves. The first half would be focused on customer acquisition, wherein we talk about some of the playbooks, some of the best practices that are essential for you to be able to acquire new customers at scale, leveraging digital marketing. And one of the consistent points of feedback that I often get from various startup founders, from various entrepreneurs that I often interact with, that I've had the opportunity to speak to, is that while they conceptually understand what SEM is, what SEO is, what Facebook is, what LinkedIn advertising can do for their business, what they struggle with is having a clear prioritization matrix or a prioritization framework that can help them make a decision on what needs to be their number one, numero uno, P0 focus. That's something that they struggle with. And obviously, it's not a question of either or. You do need to obviously make sure that your brand message is reinforced across multiple channels so that the prospect eventually takes action. But given the fact that if you're an early stage startup with limited mind space, with limited financial resources, with limited people resources, you want to have a clear sense of what are your number one priorities so that you can accordingly allocate your resources. So that's something that we will hopefully look at decipher, wherein I'll give you some simple rules of thumb on the basis of which you can make a decision that for my business, for the business that you're engaged with, what needs to be your number one priority? Does it need to be Google? Does it need to be Facebook? Does it need to be LinkedIn? What needs to be your number one priority? We look at a small caselet from my experiences at Healthify Me in building and growing Healthify Me, which today is India's number one health and fitness mobile application with over 10 million users. We look at what were some of the key elements that went into Healthify Me's mobile marketing recipe. And then we'll shift tracks. We'll focus on customer engagement. So to begin with, as I said, we focus on acquisition. In the second half, we focus more on customer and prospect engagement. So from an engagement perspective, we look at what are some of the best practices to follow. I'll take you through an example based on my experiences, building and growing what today is one of the world's leading edtech brands. I'll give you a quick caselet from that experience. And then we'll wrap up the session by focusing on a couple of different topics which are pretty close to my heart. The first one is on the need for repeat business. How do you drive repeat business with your customers, which is an essential component of any company's business model. I'll take you through a failure caselet. I did believe it then, and I do believe it even more so now, that we learn a lot more from our failures than we do from our successes. So I'll take you through a failure caselet where we actually struggled to turn around the entire repeat story in one of my earlier avatars. I'll take you through what happened back then. And I'll also take you through a success story. Fast forward several years in my edtech adventure, we actually managed to turn around the entire repeat part of the narrative successfully. I'll take you through what went into turning that story around. And then towards the end, we'll wrap up with the bonus feature, which is on various ways in which you can actually create digital brand exposure for your business. And we'll talk about one of the more unheralded, unsung heroes of digital brand building, for which there is not enough focus being given, especially by startups and SMEs in India. That's also something that we'll focus towards the end of the session. Yeah. Let's get started then. So in 2020, as I said, we went through a couple of very interesting inflection points. The first was this. In India, search and Google search are used almost anonymously, right? Because Google has almost a complete monopoly of the market. But for the first time ever in the year 2020, the Google search via the browser web was not the number one numero uno logical entry point for Indians looking to discover www, the World Wide Web, right? It was actually the Android Play Store search, which was the number one entry point for Indians looking to discover the World Wide Web, which is a pretty interesting development. And it has some pretty interesting implications for entrepreneurs. It means that you need to have a strong app strategy in place if you're trying to build a digital business and if you're trying to grow your digital brand presence. And from a marketing perspective, it also means that you need to have a very strong mobile marketing strategy in place. Yeah, this was something which is very interesting. The second inflection point was this. What you see here are the various stages that which a brand navigates across, various parts of the entire brand life cycle that a brand actually navigates across in the prospect psyche, right? Wherein a brand actually moves from awareness to consideration to evaluation to action, wherein the prospect actually flips out his or her wallet and pays for their product or service from the brand. Now, despite the explosive growth of digital over the last several years, this extremely popular symbol, the television, was still the number one brand awareness building medium in India, despite the growth of digital. In the year 2020, and this change was also accelerated because of the pandemic, television for the first time is not the number one awareness building medium in India in terms of scale, in terms of reach. It's been overtaken by these three extremely popular digital platforms, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Television has actually had to move a step further down in the entire life cycle, and it is focused more on consideration. It's more a brand reinforcement medium right now, which can essentially push the envelope on brand recall as opposed to extending reach and as opposed to seeding brand awareness in large swathes of your audience, which again is a very, very interesting data point, a very interesting inflection point. And both of these very interesting, cute, unique inflection points essentially attest to the fantastic growth of digital that has actually happened in the year 2020. And a quick sneak peek again into the impact that the pandemic has actually brought about on the entire startup and SME ecosystem. Obviously, the months of March and April were extremely tough ones for the entire country, for the entire globe, for the fintech ecosystem, and of course, the startup and the SME ecosystem in the country, which essentially is the heartbeat of the nation. But after March, since the months of May, we've seen some fantastic resurgence from all of these different sectors and the SME ecosystem in general, which has in an overwhelming fashion started gravitating towards digital payments for both receiving monies from their end customers in terms of using payment gateway, payment link, payment pages kind of products, and for paying out funds to their vendor partners and employee salaries through using business banking solutions, like for example, the Razorpay X solution. And we've seen some fantastic growth from EdTech, from health tech, from IT SaaS companies, and from gaming companies, which has been very interesting. We're seeing a lot of startups and SMEs come in from tier 2, tier 3 and below. So it's not just about the Hyderabad's, the Bangalore's, the Mumbai's of the world, which is very interesting. We're also seeing a lot of entrepreneurs come on board who have no technology awareness or who have no pre-existing knowledge of coding, but yet they want to start using digital payments, for whom a lot of these hashtag no-code products like payment pages, payment links that we offer at Razorpay, which require no hassle of integration, those have really resonated well. Plus, we're not just seeing more and more businesses gravitate towards digital payments, we're also seeing more money is being processed through the Razorpay platform, both inward and outward money movement, which again attests to the strong product market fit that a lot of these brands are actually exhibiting. Some extremely encouraging signs as we crystal ball gaze towards the rest of the year. Shifting tracks, something that I mentioned earlier, the pandemic has brought digital to the forefront like never before. The two data points that I mentioned at the start of the presentation essentially speak to that. As we go about navigating the digital jigsaw puzzle, as I said, the fundamental question that a lot of startups have is the prioritization conundrum. How do you solve for that? Does SEO need to be my number one? Does SEM? Does it need to be Facebook? Does it need to be LinkedIn? And as I said, it's not a question of either or. You do need to invest your efforts across multiple channels for them to start yielding results, so that your brand message is being reinforced. But if you're an early stage startup with limited resources, you do need to have a clear line of sight, to being able to understand what needs to be your number one priority. I know that I'm speaking to the DigiGrad audience, so I'm sure all of these terms here require no introduction in terms of what is SEM or what is SEO, but I will give you a quick 30-second crash course into SEM and SEO versus Facebook. So whenever you're searching for something on Google, what essentially is happening is there is a real-time auction. That's what's happening. Just like, let's say I'm looking to auction this copper cup, right? And you have various people who are actually bidding various rates for it. And the person who bids the highest ends up winning this cup. In a similar fashion, let's say I'm searching for resorts in Lonavala, for example, which is a very popular hill station next to Mumbai. And there is Make My Trip, which is bidding $100 for that keyword. There is, say, an Expedia, which is bidding $150 for that keyword. There are other variables which go into the eventual decision of whose ad comes up first. But just to keep it simple, let's assume that it's just the amount which is being bid by the advertiser. That is the final decision point. So in this particular case, given that Expedia has bid higher than Make My Trip, Expedia gets the right to serve first placement of their advertisement for this particular keyword. So when you search for this keyword, you would see a bunch of listings. You would see a couple of listings on top which say add those. And if a prospect actually clicks on any of those ads, let's say that Rhea is interested in taking a holiday to Lonavala, she clicks on the Expedia ad. Expedia is charged $150 by Google. If she were to click on the Make My Trip ad, Make My Trip would have been charged $100 by Google. This is a simplified version of how SEM works, but you get the picture. So all of the efforts that you as a marketer undertake to make sure that your ads get served up on Google search. And these are paid advertisements. These are cost per click advertisements, because every time a prospect clicks on them, you get charged money. And you can set up all these advertisements through a completely free tool called Google AdWords. So that's what SEM is all about, search engine marketing. Now, in that same page, if you were to scroll a little further down, you would see a bunch of listings which are called organic listings, which do not have the tag of ad against them. Now, if you were to click on any of these ads, the brand would not be charged any money. Now, these listings are based purely on merit. It's got nothing to do with who bids the highest. So Google has an organic search ranking algorithm, which makes a determination purely based on merit, purely based on the strength, the relevance, the freshness of the content, the user experience of the page, whether the page is optimized for mobile, etc. Does the page have authoritative backlinks from other pages, which are also considered authoritative? So it takes into account a whole host of these variables to determine who gets to whose organic listing, which landing page, which home page, which website's organic listing needs to be served up first. So all of the efforts that you as a marketer undertake to make sure that your website's organic listings, right, are served up higher and higher on the Google's organic search ranking algorithm are referred to as search engine optimization. This has got nothing to do with money, as I said. It's got nothing to do with who bids the highest. It's got more to do with merit. It's got to make sure that you create the right forms of content, which is fresh, which is relevant, and you deliver the best possible user experience for your users. So that is referred to as SEO. So if you had to click on those listings, the brand is not charged any money by Google. Facebook advertising and LinkedIn advertising, of course, require no introduction. I'm sure all of us see it in our everyday lives. And I'm sure you must have gone through that at DigiGrad. Now, let's say that Ria is an entrepreneur. She understands what all of these mean. She understands what Facebook advertising means. She understands what LinkedIn means. She understands how SEO works. She understands how SEM works. But what she's confused with is for her business, which is probably, let's say she's into online fashion. She wants to make a decision on what needs to be her number one priority for her business, for her brand. What does she need to make as her number one P0 numero uno priority from a digital marketing brand building perspective? So as an entrepreneur, you can go about navigating this question and determining the answer in a couple of different ways. First is you ask yourself the question, the product or the category I'm operating in, is that mass or is that niche? I sell t-shirts online, I'm probably mass. I sell sherwanis and kurtis and lehengas online. I sell digital marketing courses online, I'm probably niche. Now, again, this question of whether you're mass or niche again can be answered in a couple of different ways. One is the gut-based instinct that an entrepreneur has. So Ria knows, given the category, the space that she operates in, that she's probably mass. She knows that she's probably niche. The other way, or as a marketer, you would have a strong understanding of your category. So you know whether you're mass or niche. The other way, which is the first option, is a more subjective, gut-based approach. You can also adopt a more data-backed, objective approach to making this determination, wherein you open up Google AdWords, and I'm sure you've heard of this tool called the Keyword Planner, which is available, again, completely for free. And all you have to do is to search for the keyword volumes for the core keywords that are related to your category. Just to get a sense of, in your target market, let's assume that's India, how many people are actually already searching for keywords related to the category or the space to which you're operating in. Now, there is no science to this. It's not a perfect science. It is a grayscale. It is a spectrum. It's not a binary for sure. But one rule of thumb that you can adopt is if the average monthly searches for the core keywords related to the category or the space that you're operating in exceed 25 to 30,000 a month, assuming your target market is India, then you could consider yourself to be in a mass category. Else, you consider yourself to be niche. So if you're in a mass category, you prioritize Google and you make that your number one numero uno priority. Why is that? Because you already have existing user demand patterns out there on Google. So it makes sense for you as a brand to piggyback on that demand, to ride that wave. There are already people searching for how can I buy t-shirts online on Google. You got millions of Indians searching for it. You need to ride that wave. Now, not all of us can be Amazon and Flipkart. Not all of us may have the marketing muscle to pump in billions of dollars to change user behavior and to develop user behavior. But what we can do as smart marketers and smart entrepreneurs is to ride existing user demand patterns and to leverage existing user behavior, which is already there on Google search. So that's what you need to keep in mind. So if you're operating in a mass category, and by mass I mean there is already a critical mass of search volume available for your category on Google, then you make Google as your number one priority. What happens if you're niche? You don't directly run into Facebook's arms. You think about it a little bit. The first question you ask yourself, if you're niche, which means that you don't have a lot of latent or existing user demand patterns on Google, you ask yourself the question, the brand or the category I'm operating in, is it high on personal connect? And does it give me the opportunity to inject a very strong visual element in my communications? If so, you prioritize Facebook. Let me give you an example. When I first joined Healthify Me, it was a huge culture shock for me. Because for the first time in my life, Facebook was the number one dhanda driving, hard-working performance marketing channel. Till such time, in all of my previous experiences in EdTech and in travel tech, Facebook had always worked more as a brand building channel and never really worked as a core performance marketing, dhanda driving, hard-working channel. Now, for the first time at Healthify Me, it was working as a performance marketing channel, which was very interesting. And just for those of you who are unaware, Healthify Me is a freemium application. As I said, it's India's largest today, and it is freemium because it has certain services which are free and certain services which are premium or paid for. So free plus premium equals freemium. So for example, it has the world's largest database of Indian foods that are mapped to accurate calorie breakdowns. So regardless of whether you're consuming some kind of exotic local cuisine from Kashmir or Kanyakumari or Assam or Andaman or Lakshadweep, you would see calorie breakdowns for all of those Indian foods on the app. Plus, of course, if you're working out, you can again log all of your workout patterns. So it serves as a calorie counter, and it makes people a lot more mindful of how many calories they're consuming and how many calories they're burning. In addition to that, the premium services involve personalized diet, fitness, and yoga plans based on the health goals of various users. Now, Healthify Me as a brand was enabling a young mother to overcome, post-pregnancy body fat, which she had put on after her delivery, and rediscover her confidence, to rediscover a healthier and fitter version of herself. It would help. It was helping, and it is helping a 40-something who had, put on a lot of weight, had developed a tummy, and hypertension and diabetes because of a sedentary lifestyle. Right? It helps that kind of a person overcome all of these and recover and lose weight. It helps a 50-something who's got hypertension, overcome hypertension and rediscover a healthier, fitter version of himself or herself. It helps a 20-something young man living in a Bangalore or a Mumbai get a six-pack ab and muzzle up. So it's enabling a lot of people across the entire age spectrum to discover healthier and fitter versions of themselves. So it's extremely high on personal connect, right? So health and fitness and weight loss is extremely high on empathy and extremely high on personal connect. It's very close to the identity of an individual. Plus, as a brand, all of the talking that we did was testimonial led, right? We had authentic retellings of our customers' life transformation stories, and we put it out there, and we let our customers speak for themselves. And as a brand, we hardly did any advertising for ourselves. So we had video, which was a primary form of communication, and it was very high on empathy, because you would have a 30-something person talking about their weight loss journey. You would have a 40-something person talking about their weight loss journey. You would have a 20-something person talking about their muzzle up journey, right? So it was extremely high on customer empathy. Extremely strong visual elements could be injected in the communication, very rich in video, and very strong personal connect. For all of these reasons, Facebook was the number one platform, because what does Facebook want? Facebook wants its audiences to stay on Facebook. It wants content on Facebook which audiences can relate with, can engage with, can resonate with. So we noticed that content like these, and given the category and the space that we operated in, did really well on Facebook. So proactive health tech, not the kind of health tech that a Practo operates in, which is more reactive, but proactive health tech, the likes of a Healthify Me and a Cult Fit, the spaces that they operate in, and potentially even fashion tech. These could be candidates for Facebook, because they're both very involved purchases. They are very close to the identity of an individual. They strike a very strong personal connect. Plus, as a brand, you can inject a very strong visual element in your communication, which is why you need to think about Facebook, even if you're niche. And then if you're operating in the B2B space and you still check off all these boxes, you directly replace Facebook with LinkedIn. Yeah, that's a quick pro tip. What happens if you're niche, but you are low on personal connect? And you don't have to take this personally, right? The nature of certain categories is such. Let me give you an example. At Razorpay, we're faced with the same problem, right? We are in the space of B2B payments. We're not in the peer-to-peer payment space. We provide payment gateway solutions. We provide business banking solutions, which businesses can use, etc. Now, an entrepreneur doesn't wake up in the morning and get excited about having to integrate a payment gateway, or to use a payment link or a payment page, or to use Razorpay payout solutions, right? They don't. That's the nature of the category itself. It's not like a Healthify Me or a health tech where we're enabling weight loss. We don't have a very strong personal connect that we can strike with our target consumers. But that's okay. That's the nature of the category itself. But we're still niche. As I said, we are still in the B2B payment space. There are not hundreds of thousands of Indians who are actually searching for looking for payment gateway solutions, or who are looking for business banking solutions. It's still a niche space. It is still B2B. And it is low on personal connect. What do you do? So in this case, what you do is something interesting. You make SEO your focus. You create content. Obviously, you need to create content for the exact category in which you're operating in, which in Razorpay's case is payment gateway, business banking solutions, etc. But what you also do is you go after keyword categories which have a larger catchment area, which have greater search demand patterns out there, which in this case could be potentially entrepreneurship. But keep in mind, this keyword pool, while it might have a larger catchment area and greater user search behavior patterns, it still needs to be relevant to your target consumer persona. Who is Razorpay's target consumer persona? It's entrepreneurs. First-time entrepreneurs, wannabe entrepreneurs, serial entrepreneurs, second, third-time entrepreneurs. Yeah, those are my product heads, technology heads, etc. And everybody wants to read up on entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship has fantastic search volume demand, significantly higher than payment gateway or business banking as core keyword pools. So as a brand, I'm giving myself the opportunity to gain a larger set of eyeballs, gain access to a larger set of eyeballs by creating content, even if it is not directly related to my business, aligned with a keyword pool which is still relevant to my target consumer persona. It's not relevant. It's got nothing to do with payments, entrepreneurship, but it's still relevant for my target customers. And it gives my brand exposure to a larger audience set than I would have got exposed to if I were just creating content focused on payment gateway. So what I do is, if you're operating in a niche space and you don't have the luxury of being able to strike a very strong personal connect with your customers, then you go back to Google, you make SEO your focus, and you create content not just for the core keywords in which you're operating in, which are business relevant, but you also focus on neighboring miscellaneous keywords which are still relevant for your target consumer persona. Yeah, like in the Razorpay case, which is entrepreneurship. Larger catchment area, greater keyword volume demand, more users searching for it. Your brand gets access to more number of eyeballs, and you get them in as part of your funnel. And you get your brand narrative in there, and you engage and nurture them over a period of time before you convert them into paying customers. So that's a strategy you adopt. So if you're mass, in summary, you do make Google your number one priority. If you're niche and you're able to strike a very strong personal connect with your customers, the nature of your category is such, then you make Facebook as your number one. If you're in the B2B space, you make LinkedIn as your number one. If you check off all of those boxes again, if you're niche and yet you're not necessarily able to strike a very strong personal connect because the nature of your category is such, like for example, the B2B payment space, then you focus on SEO and create content not just for the core category in which you operate in, but also for neighboring affiliated categories which have a larger keyword demand pattern out there. Moving on, a quick sneak peek into what were some of the key elements that went into building Healthifamy's brand presence today. Healthifamy today, as I said, is India's largest health and fitness mobile app with over 10 million users. Some of the key elements that went into our entire mobile marketing recipe. The first one was Facebook, for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. Just give me one moment, excuse me. For the reasons that I mentioned earlier, Facebook was the number one platform. But what interestingly enough happened was this. We also spent a lot of money on Google, and Google was not the number one. Surprise, surprise. Unlike in a lot of my previous experiences was where Google was the number one platform. In this particular case, Google was not the number one platform. And when we started off mobile marketing on Google way back in 2016, 2017, Google introduced something called as Universal App Campaigns, UAC campaigns, which was universally hated by the entire advertising community because the UAC campaigns took away a lot of control from advertisers. And advertisers who are used to the kind of control that Google AdWords and search could actually provide them, they hated the absence of it in UAC campaigns. And UAC campaigns essentially meant that you as a brand would give Google the iTunes listing, your app's iTunes listing link, your Play Store listing link, the creatives, etc., the copy, and Google's machine learning algorithm would actually make a decision on which cookied user in the World Wide Web to actually serve up those ads when. And as an advertiser, you had very, very limited control. You could define the overall sandbox for Google. You could tell Google that only focus on India or only focus on metro cities, but that was it. But beyond that, it was pretty much, it was Google's decision, Google's machine learning algorithms decision, so to speak. So when we first launched with our UAC campaigns, the results were very poor, unsurprisingly enough. But what we ended up doing was we ended up sticking with it. And but what we had done a really good job was we really did a good job of instrumenting a lot of events, upstream, midstream, and downstream life cycle events, which were sent back, anonymized and aggregated through the Google Pixel back into the Google ecosystem. Let me give you an example. Let me try to simplify this with with an example. Let's say Ria comes in and downloads. Ria, I apologize, I'm taking your name and your example again. I hope you don't mind. Uh, so let's say that Ria, installs the Healthify app. She goes in and registers on the Healthify app, and she finishes her registration. Now that's an upstream event. I'm calling it an upstream event because that is fairly early on in her life cycle of engagement with the Healthify app. Right? She's just completed her registration. Now I send back this information of this cookied user, which is Ria, anonymized and aggregated. Keep in mind, I send it back to Google. Now, Ria continues to engage with the app. The app gives her a lot of in-app engagement hooks. The app says, Ria, are you interested in a 7-day free trial? The app asks Ria if she's interested in a 1-hour, no strings attached diet consultation with one of Healthify's top nutritionists. Ria says yes to it. So that information, which is a midstream life cycle event, is again fed back to Google. Further on, a few days later, a few weeks later, Ria goes in and signs up for a 6-month yoga plan. Yeah. Now that information again is fed back to Google. Now what I tell Google is this: Google, listen, Ria represents my ideal customer persona. Can you find me 100 more clones of this Ria? In the World Wide Web, right? Find me more people just like Ria. Now Google's machine learning algorithm, when the scale is low, in this particular case, I've given Google just the data of one Ria. Google's accuracy and its ability to be able to find more clones of your ideal customer persona would be limited. Now, as your scale grows, as you continue to invest in the platform and you have data of not just one Ria, but you have data of say 1,000 Rias, and you're asking Google to go find the next 100,000 Rias, Google's accuracy would be a lot better. So over 3 successive quarters, what ended up happening was Google became a very, very, very close second to Facebook in terms of its ability to being able to drive dhanda and ROI. And this is the kind of targeting which I popularly refer to as inside out targeting. Now, the old traditional form of targeting is where you as a marketer sit down through your consumer research, or you as an entrepreneur decide that this is my ideal customer persona definition, and you accordingly tailor your marketing strategies and your targeting matrices around that source of truth. Now, in this, that is what I call outside in targeting, where you are force fitting a version of truth into your marketing systems. In this particular case, what's happening is you're letting data and you're letting programmatic platforms like Facebook and Google, you're letting their machine learning algorithms actually tell you who your ideal customer persona is, because in real time, you're continuously feeding them data based on the interactions and the actions that various prospects are actually performing in your platform at various points in their life cycle. So this is what I popularly refer to as inside out targeting. For example, at Healthify, when we started off, we thought the millennial was our ideal customer persona. It turns out it wasn't. Google proved us wrong. Google came back and told us, the data actually came back and told us that the people who are beyond the millennial bracket, they were the ones who are the ideal customer persona, because people who are in the millennial bracket are fairly healthy. They're not really thinking about health and fitness, and or they don't necessarily have a very strong propensity to pay. So people who are older than the millennial bracket have a greater propensity to pay compared to millennials, and they are less fit. So they have a greater propensity to pay again. That was something which happened wherein Google became a very close second over 3 successive quarters. App Store optimization, we've done a really good job of this. ASO, as it's called, you can think of it as SEO, search engine optimization's cousin, but more applicable for the app ecosystem. So all the efforts that you as a marketer undertake to make sure that your app's listing, be it on the iTunes Store or the App Store, the Google Play Store, actually is served up higher and higher for user search queries on either of these two platforms. So all of the efforts that you undertake to make sure that your content is optimized, your creative is optimized, etc., is referred to as App Store optimization. And we had done a really good job of App Store optimization, which meant that even during quarters when marketing dollars were hard to come by, our scale never dropped because our organic installs continue to skyrocket. And Healthify was, by the way, and still is, a mobile first and a mobile only company. So mobile marketing was all of what we did. Moving on, we did a lot of in-app marketing, and the in-app marketing was done very intelligently. And we had something called as a registration score, which was essentially a blended score that we had for every single app registrant, which would give us a sense of what is their probability of conversion, which was based on a bunch of different variables based on historical data. So I know from historical data that an iPhone user has a greater probability of conversion than an Android user. I know from historical data that somebody from a tier 1 city has a greater chance for conversion than somebody from a Surat. I know from historical data that somebody who has a pre-existing lifestyle condition potentially converts better, like a diabetes or a hypertension potentially converts better than somebody who does not. So using data points like these, I specifically target people who are in my top 5-10 percentile of my lead scores with specific in-app marketing hooks. For example, I could target a Ria with something that I mentioned earlier, right? A 7-day free trial, or a 1-hour diet consultation with my top nutritionist. So these were in-app marketing hooks, which were attempts made by the brand, by the app, to engage and nurture the prospect across their life cycle of engagement with the application. We did a really good job of email marketing as well, and I'll take you through, take you through some of the examples and the work on email marketing in a few minutes when we get to the section on EdTech. And we did a really good job of AMP as well, Google Accelerated Mobile Pages. AMP is a little bit of a 101 right now, and it is a simple infrastructural tweak that you need to make to your website's front-end code to make sure that your mobile site loads really fast. And this increases your chances of improving your mobile SEO rankings. And this was something that we've done a really good job of as well. Moving on and shifting focus to lead engagement and nurturing. Lead engagement and nurturing, very simply put, is about doing more with what you have at the most philosophical level possible. From a 20,000 feet perspective, acquisition is about bringing more people in. Engagement and nurturing is about doing more with the people who are already having some kind of an affinity, some kind of a salience with your brand. So how do you engage and nurture prospects who have already entered your marketing funnel, or people who are your existing customers, or people who have already had some kind of an affinity or a touch point with your brand, but who have potentially dropped out of your funnel? How do you engage and nurture them across their entire life cycle? That's what engagement and nurturing is about. Let's try and understand this with a simple example. Before we do that, could I just switch on the light for a minute? I notice it's getting a little dark. Excuse me for a quick second, folks. Be right back. Yep, I'm back. Sorry about that. I hope you're able to see me all right now. It just went very dark very soon, very quickly. The weather here is pretty amazing in Bangalore, by the way. So as I said, engagement and nurturing is about working with your existing pipeline of leads, prospects, potentially existing customers as well in some cases, across various touch points, and nurturing and engaging them so that you can extract greater juice out of that pipeline and monetize that better. Now, again, you've got to ask yourself, before you dive headfirst into engagement and nurturing, you've still got to ask yourself a question: how important does engagement and nurturing need to be for my business? You've still got to ask yourself that question. Now, again, a bunch of different variables come into play for you to make that decision. At the most philosophical level possible, at the highest possible level, the level of importance, the level of priority that you need to associate for engagement and nurturing is directly proportional to and correlated with the number of questions that your prospect would have on your business. So the greater the number of questions that your prospect has, the greater is the need for engagement and nurturing. The lesser the number of questions, the lesser the need for engagement and nurturing again. Now, if you're operating in a category which is fairly mature, where the processes and user behavior patterns are well set, which means you're operating in a mature category, customers have lesser questions. For example, you're operating in e-commerce, right? People don't have too many questions versus say you're selling digital marketing courses online. People have a lot of questions. So mature versus nascent category, that plays a big part, right? So I'm looking to buy a OnePlus phone. It doesn't matter whether I buy it from an Amazon or a Flipkart. It's the same phone. I don't have too many questions, but I'm looking to learn, say, digital marketing online. Digigrad defines it differently, and some of Digigrad's competitors define it differently. So people would have a lot of questions. They need to be engaged and nurtured, and those questions need to be answered before they make the purchase decision. So the more mature your category, the lesser is your need for engagement and nurturing. The more nascent, the greater is the need for engagement and nurturing, everything else being the same. This is one of the variables that influences it. There are others as well. The second is, of course, the level of brand presence that you have. How omnipotent is your brand? That plays a big part. So if everything else being the same, if your brand is extremely well known, then customers and prospects would trust you that much more. They would have lesser number of questions, so you would have a lesser need for engagement and nurturing. That plays a big part. So the greater your brand presence, the lesser is the need for engagement and nurturing, everything else being the same. your average selling price plays a big part. So the more expensive the product that you're looking to sell, the greater are the number of questions your prospects are going to have, and the greater convincing that they would need to, the more convincing actually needs to be done to get them to part with their hard-earned money. So the more expensive a product, so selling a digital marketing course possibly costs you around 12,000-15,000 bucks for you to buy a course online. Amazon's average selling price is probably less than 1,000 bucks, right? Despite their efforts to try to get Indians to buy washing machines, most of the people end up still buying regular stuff, and their average selling prices are still less than 1,000 bucks. So the lesser your average selling price, the lesser is the need for engagement and nurturing. The other thing that plays a big part is the length of your sales conversion cycle. Now, the sales conversion cycle can be defined as the average time it takes for a prospect, from being a prospect to actually become a paying customer. So the longer your sales conversion cycle, the greater is the need for engagement and nurturing. If you're operating in the B2B space, let's say you're Infosys, your sales conversion cycles are probably 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. If you're Domino's Pizza, your sales conversion cycles are possibly 5 minutes. If you're a DigiGrad, and I'm assuming, and because I've worked for an edtech company before, if you're DigiGrad, your sales conversion cycles are possibly 4 weeks. In Healthifyme's case as well, the sales conversion cycles were 4 weeks, which means it takes on an average 4 weeks for a free user of the Healthifyme app to become a paying customer. B2B versus B2C, again, everything else being the same. If you are in the B2B space, you usually check off all these boxes. And I do realize I'm guilty of stereotyping here, but in most cases, if you're in the B2B space, everything else being the same, you would have a greater need for engagement and nurturing than B2C. Service versus product is related to the other point, which is on the levels of standardization. So if the significant component of your value proposition as a brand is comprised of service, which means that you've got a human element that comes in, then that brings with it lesser levels of standardization, which brings with it more number of questions. Classic example, product versus service, Amazon, right? Amazon, you buy it's all about the product. There's a very limited service component there. It's about, does the service, are you able to get the product really quickly? And does the service delivery person have a smile on his face or her face? That is the level of service impact on the brand's value proposition. Everything else is about the product. It's the same standardized product. But if you're, say, looking to buy a digital marketing course online, for example, it's the service is the fundamental component, because a significant component of the brand's value proposition is influenced by the quality of that instructor. Now, people would have questions on the quality of the instructor. Now, DigiGrad's quality of instructors might be really high. Some of the other competitors might have instructors of questionable quality. So that, and because you've got a human being involved, and with human beings being involved, that brings with it additional levels of variability, which means people will have more questions. So if you're operating in a space which is service heavy, if services or the service component of your brand's value proposition is extremely high, then you would have a greater need for engagement and nurturing, everything else being the same. A quick case slide from my experiences, working for and building what is today one of the world's largest edtech brands. And there, we've done a really good job of engagement and nurturing. So from an engagement and nurturing perspective, we've done, we followed some fantastic best practices, and I'll try to share some of those with you over the next few minutes. So let's say that Ria is interested in learning digital marketing. She comes in and signs up, let's say at DigiGrad. She signs in at DigiGrad. So what she would get potentially is on day 0, she would get a welcome email saying, "Welcome to the digital marketing program, Ria." And congratulations on having taken the first step in building your career in digital marketing. Yeah. A few days after that, Ria would potentially get another email which says, "Here are some of the latest and greatest blogs on digital marketing, Ria. In case you were wondering, in case you're interested, this can help you expand your knowledge." A few days after that, Ria would get another email which has a bunch of testimonials of working professionals, of people just like Ria, who have seen career advancement after having taken this course, right? They've seen career advancement in terms of increased salaries or, say, promotions, etc. So she would get a link which has a bunch of testimonials, which again, all of these, as you can see, are subtle yet confident and scientifically designed nudges that helps build affinity towards the brand in Ria's psyche, right? So what the brand is doing in a very subtle fashion is they are trying to engage and nurture Ria so that she can eventually become a paying customer. A few days after that, Ria gets a webinar invitation for a webinar just like this one, conducted by an industry expert, right? Which helps build a lot of credibility and trust towards a brand. And a few days after that, Ria gets a 20% discount code, which expires in 48 hours, which is the slam dunk, so to speak, wherein the brand is actually moving in for the sale. And they're actually trying to convert Ria from being a free lead, so to speak, into a paying customer. Now, what you see here is the classic sales lifecycle drip email. It's referred to as drip because you've got emails which are going out one after another based on a set of predefined rules, which you as a marketer can define, just like water dripping off a tap, one after another. So these are called life cycle drip emails, classic marketing jargon. Now, all of the interventions and the touch points that the brand has had with their prospect, which in this case is Ria, and this can happen across multiple channels, right? This can be automated across email. This can be automated across WhatsApp, SMS, browser notifications. The platform that helps you set up these rules and automate all these interventions across all these channels are referred to as marketing automation platforms. Given here a bunch of brand names which are world leaders in the space. HubSpot is obviously the world's leading marketing automation platform. Acton and Marketo are very strong brands as well. Salesforce, of course, world's leading CRM tool, also has a marketing automation module. But if you're an early stage startup, most of these would be pretty much unaffordable. So some more value for money options are given here in terms of marketing automation platforms and active campaigns. And closer to home in India, you've got, of course, Freshmarketer from Freshworks, WebEngage, and of course, Zoho. All of these are value for money products. And till your scale reaches potentially around 100,000 in terms of a sending list size, till such time you can potentially use one of these platforms. And once you go beyond this, you could look to upgrade to one of these marketing automation platforms. Moving on, I think the other question you've got to ask yourself is this, which is a more philosophical question. How can lead engagement and nurturing help your business? What are the various use cases where lead engagement and nurturing can actually play a part? The first use case is the one that we just saw, right? Where the edtech company, potentially DigiGrad, was actually using engagement and nurturing for converting Ria from being a lead to a paying customer as part of the transaction lifecycle itself. That's one. Of course, the marketer working at DigiGrad has the luxury and of doing that because they have the benefit of a 4-week sales conversion time window. So they've got the benefit of time. Time is on their side. They've got 4 weeks to convert that lead into a paying customer. Right now, what happens if you're, say, a marketer working for a Domino's Pizza or a Make My Trip in the flights department, where the sales lifecycle conversion time windows are 5 minutes for a Domino's and potentially 30 minutes if somebody is looking to book flights? People are in a hurry, right? So let's say Ria is looking to order pizza. She's hungry and she is in a hurry. She's not going to wait for 4 weeks to become a paying customer. So she's going to make her decision really quickly. So in this particular case, you don't necessarily have the luxury of time to engage and nurture that prospect to make a difference as part of that transaction life cycle. That transaction is gone. You can't make a difference during that life cycle. But what you can do is, let's say you know that Ria is a vegetarian who loves paneer toppings. You can keep sending Ria regular emails after the transaction is done about your new paneer toppings, about your new exotic paneer toppings on your pizza. So the next time Ria is feeling hungry and lazy and she doesn't want to cook, she wants to order Domino's home, your brand is top of mind. Domino's is top of mind. So you can use engagement and nurturing in cases where your sales conversion time windows are very small, like in the case of a Domino's, like in the case of flight booking, potentially for driving greater repeat behavior from customers, driving greater loyalty, greater stickiness. The other use case for which you can use engagement and nurturing for is refunneling users. So at HealthyFamily, we used to have this concept of users who have the app installed on their phone but who have forgotten about it. They've just given up on the brand. These are inactive users, hibernating users, sleeping users, you could call it what you will. So we used to have consistent efforts to try and refunnel them. And as most of you know, it's called a funnel, and the classic marketing funnel, right? You've got traffic on top, you've got leads in the middle, you've got paying customers at the bottom. And it's called a funnel because people keep dropping off continuously across various parts of the funnel, and it gets narrower and narrower as you go further and further down. How do you as a brand continuously refunnel users, people who have dropped out of your funnel, like the hibernating users in the HealthyFamily case? How do you refunnel them back? That's also a classic use case for engagement and nurturing. So for example, at HealthyFamily, we used to have these Instagram lives, which were conducted by some of our top nutritionists, where a nutritionist comes and talks about, a trendy topic on health and fitness, right? Dangers of crash dieting, benefits of a keto diet, benefits of a vegan diet, topics like these. So these kinds of topics were often used in our reactivation lifecycle emailers as an attempt to actually reactivate and energize these hibernating cohorts. I want to get them back into my funnel. I want to put them back into my funnel. I want them to start engaging with me as a brand. So that's a third use case for engagement and nurturing. You can use it as part of the transaction lifecycle. In summary, in cases where you've got the luxury of time, where conversion time windows are fairly long, you can use it primarily for driving greater repeat behavior. In cases where your sales lifecycle conversion time windows are very small, and of course, you can use it for refunneling users. And from a business perspective, if you're talking to a CEO or some of you could be entrepreneurs yourself, I don't know about the CEOs and the entrepreneurs you've spoken with, but at least the entrepreneurs that I've interacted with, they hate marketing jargon. What they enjoy more than marketing jargon is terms like top line and bottom line, or dhande wali terms, so to speak. So if you had to explain in pure business terms why a business or an organization or a brand actually needs engagement and nurturing, there are two strong reasons. The first one is your sales team is going to be significantly more productive. And if a sales team is more productive, it directly means more money and more top line and more revenue for the company. I don't know about the companies that you're a part of, but at least the organizations that I have seen, the sales teams in most cases are usually the CEO's blue-eyed boys and girls. They are the CEO's favorite teams. When a CEO looks at the sales team, they see them as the people who bring in the money. When the CEO looks at the marketing team, unfortunately enough, they see them as the guys who end up spending their money. So if you're giving the CEO an option to make their sales team more productive, then that's something that the CEO is going to really enjoy. So from a business perspective, it makes a lot of sense. How is that going to happen? Let's take a simple example again. Let's go back to Ria. Let's say Ria runs a company. She's an entrepreneur and she has a 5-member inside sales team. And her inside sales team can make 100 calls each day, and they work for 20 days a month, which means they are going to get in touch with 500 multiplied by 20, which is 10,000. Is my math right? Yeah, 10,000 prospects in a given month. Let's assume that each call equals a unique prospect, so which means they can get in touch with 10,000 prospects in a given month. Now, what happens if Ria's team's pipeline is 100,000 strong? How does the sales team make the determination of which are the top 10,000 to call from this 100,000? That's where the power of technology, the power of engagement and nurturing, the power of marketing automation comes in. Wherein through marketing automation systems, what Ria can do is she can send emailers out, SMSs out, browser notifications out, and have multiple touch points with her entire universe of 100,000 prospects who are already part of a funnel, right? And she can observe what kind of interactions they have on emails, and she can accordingly create lead scores around those behavior patterns. I see that there are some prospects who are opening my emails. Some prospects are registering for my webinar. Some prospects are attending my webinar. Some prospects are coming to my website, reading my blog. They're visiting my pricing page. Accordingly, she can create a blended lead score, like we did in the Healthify Me case, where I spoke about how we created a blended lead score. Using the marketing automation platform, she can create a blended lead score for all of these 100,000 prospects. Now, all that Ria's 5-member sales team now needs to do is to sort these 100,000 prospects in descending order of their lead score and call the top 10,000. So this has twin benefits. The sales team is spending time only with those prospects who have a greater, mathematically proven, higher probability of conversion. Second, which means the company makes more money, better top line. But the other very good byproduct of all of this is that you are not getting in touch with the remaining 90,000 people who are not possibly ready to make a purchase decision. Yeah. So Ria's brand equity, her company's brand equity is not getting spoiled. Because her sales team is not spam calling the remaining 90,000 who are not quite ready to make a purchase. So from both counts, it makes a lot of sense. The second reason why you should consider engagement and nurturing from a business perspective is this, and I cannot stress this enough. Marketing automation platforms through which you do engagement and nurturing by a factor of 10,000 and above are significantly more cost effective than cost per click CPC or cost per 1,000 impressions CPM based platforms like Google and Facebook. Which means that for the same marketing spend, you get to acquire a higher or equal number of new customers, which means your cost of customer acquisition goes down, which means your bottom line starts improving. So you need to consider from a business perspective, engagement and nurturing for two strong reasons: for increased top line and for increased bottom line. A quick pro tip, and this is a question I'm often asked, is how long should I keep sending engagement and nurturing emails? Or how long should I keep my engagement and nurturing efforts? How long should I sustain those efforts before I give up? Let's try and understand this in the example that I gave of the edtech company earlier, potentially Digigrad, which has a 4-week sales lifecycle time window. If you notice, the emails are being sent out till around day 18 or day 20. That was not by accident. That was by design. So you've got to think of the entire engagement and nurturing lifecycle as a relay race, right? With the first 3 quarters of the race being run by the marketing team, and the last quarter or the last lap or the home stretch being run by the sales team. So it's like the baton needs to be handed over by the marketing team to the sales team. So the marketing team needs to do the heavy lifting for 3 quarters of the race before handing it off to the sales team, which means that your engagement and nurturing lifecycle emailers need to be sent out for approximately 3 quarters of your entire sales conversion time window, which in this case is around 20 to 24 days. If you're having a 4-week time window. If you're say Digigrad, you know that your prospects take around 4 weeks to become paying customers. It would be stupid or silly if you had to send, let's say Ria signs up as a prospect and I send her 5 emails in 2 days. Ria's going to mark me as spam and unsubscribe. Or if I were to send Ria, say 1 email every month, that again is the other end of the spectrum. That's not going to work as well, because I know from data that my prospects take on an average 4 weeks to become paying customers. Or if you're say working at Infosys, and Infosys, you know from data that prospects take around 12, 18 months to become paying customers. So there it would be wrong to follow the Digigrad example of sending 4 emails in 20 days, right? You might be better off by sending a monthly newsletter there. So that's something for you to keep in mind, wherein you pace your drip lifecycle emailers and you spread them out over around 75 to 80% of your entire sales conversion time window. Yeah. Moving on, we're almost here towards the last lap of the entire session. We're going to focus on, as I mentioned earlier, a couple of topics that I have a soft corner towards, so to speak. The first is around driving repeat business, and this is an extremely important ingredient in any business model, so to speak. So during one of my earlier avatars, I used to take care of digital marketing and product management for what was back then India's leading online ethnic wear platform. We used to sell, saris, sherwanis, kurtis, kurtas, lehengas to Indians, primarily to the diaspora living abroad. And this was before Flipkart and Amazon launched, ethnic wear categories in India. So back then we were still the number one. But the primary value proposition was to non-resident Indians or the Indian diaspora living abroad. So Indians living in Detroit, Toronto, London, Australia, Texas, New Jersey, right, where they don't necessarily have access to high quality tailoring options. That's where the product market fit was, because the brand not just used to sell ready-made products, but they also used to customize the products according to the body measurements and the requirements of the customers. And obviously in India, you have access to high quality tailoring options in every single street, but you don't necessarily have access to those kinds of tailoring options if you're living abroad, or they're very expensive. So the product had a very strong product market fit. It made a lot of money. Average selling prices were very high, $600, $700 were the average selling prices. And unlike a lot of other e-commerce unicorns in the country, this was a company that made real money, was cash flow positive, strong EBITDAs. But the problem was this: people used to buy a single lehenga for an Eid or a Diwali or a wedding, but they used to disappear for 3 years flat, right? Never to come back potentially. And which meant that the company was always dependent on new customers for its revenues. So it was like people were coming in through one door and leaving through the other, which made the company and the brand pretty risky from an investment perspective. So when we tried to raise multiple rounds of funding with venture capitalists found the business to be risky, because they felt we were only dependent on acquiring newer and newer customers, because people were just not sticky. They were not staying with the brand. They were coming in through one door, leaving through the other. This was a problem, and we couldn't turn that story around. This company continues to do well. It continues to make its own money. But unfortunately enough, we've never been able to achieve the kind of hockey stick growth that a lot of brands aspire towards. Fast forward several years, in one of my experiences, in an edtech company, we had a very similar problem statement. And we used to sell products which were priced anywhere from around 12,000-15,000 rupees, which is pretty high in the Indian context. So if I've just convinced, say, Ria to buy a digital marketing certification program for me, and she's just spent 15,000 rupees of her hard-earned money in buying that certification, it's going to be a pretty difficult conversation for me to convince her again to spend another 15,000 bucks with me, right? So here again was a company with strong gross margins, strong EBITDAs, but the problem was extremely low repeat behavior from customers, which is a big problem statement. And we solved this by saying that by pivoting the brand to a different kind of a narrative. We said we're not just selling training programs to prospects, but we are here to sell the concept of a learning path. So my pitch to Ria is this. I'm telling her, I'm not having a transactional relationship with you wherein I'm just selling a particular course to you. I'm here as your career planner. And I'm selling you not just a particular course, which is a very transactional one. I'm selling you the entire learning path. If say you're part of the marketing track, you're here at the base of this mountain and you want to get to this aspirational peak, which is say the CMO role, chief marketing officer role, if you're in the marketing track, the chief data scientist role, if you're in the data science track. And for getting to that peak, you need to go through these steps, right? And this is your learning path, so to speak, to get to that peak. And for getting to that peak, you need to take these 2-3 other courses to get there. So essentially, I started selling the concept of a learning path, which in other words means a bundled offering. And these products were sold one after another, and the pitch became totally different. And we started targeting specific cohorts of existing customers, and we made this particular pitch. We instituted a specific series of repeat life cycle trips to make this happen. And over 3 successive quarters, what ended up happening was from virtually zero, right? 0% almost. It was a very small, negligible percentage of our month-on-month revenues used to come from our existing customers through repeat revenue, but we managed to move that to 20% over 3 successive quarters, which was a pretty significant win for us. So that's how we managed to turn around the repeat success story in one of my earlier examples, in one of my earlier adventures. So the first one was a failure caselet, so to speak, where we could not turn it around. The second one was a successful one. Shifting tracks, we're going to focus now on the various ways and means by which you can actually build brand exposure for your company, for your business in the digital ecosystem. Now, there are again various ways in which you can go about creating brand exposure. I'm going to try and potentially simplify this by giving you a very dumbed down, simplified example. Now, there are various ways in which you can create media exposure. One of the very popular ways is through owned media exposure, which is the exposure to the eyeballs, the eardrums that you have access to, which are your own website traffic, which you've not paid for, which is your organic website traffic, your own Facebook followers, right? Your own Twitter handle followers. That is your owned media. So let's say that Ria runs a company and she has a brand and she has a Facebook page with 100 followers. She makes a simple post. And let's assume, for simplicity's sake, for the purpose of this example, that all 100 of them end up seeing it. Now, of course, Mark Zuckerberg has gone on record saying that organic reach on Facebook starts dwindling as your scale grows, right? So which means that if you're having 1,000 followers, you make a post, say 800 of them end up seeing it. When that scale increases to 10,000, 6,000 of them might end up seeing it. When that increases to 100,000, say 40,000 of them might end up seeing it. You understand where I'm going with this, right? Your scale starts dropping your organic reach starts dropping as your scale starts growing. That's Facebook's way of gently nudging you towards spending money on the platform. Now, for this particular case, however, let's assume that Ria makes a post. She's not spent any money in promoting it. It's a simple organic post. Let's assume that she has 100 followers and all 100 of them end up seeing it. Now, the 100 people, the 100 eyeballs that Ria has got access to, her brand has got exposure to, is referred to as owned media. Now, let's say Ria spends 10,000 rupees and gets an additional exposure to 10,000 people. Again, simplified for the purpose of this example. Let's say that she gets access to 10,000 eyeballs. That is referred to as paid media. Now, let's say that there is this third aspect of media creation, which there is not enough focus on, especially by Indian startups and Indian SMEs, which pains me a lot, which is on earned media. Let's say that Ria makes a post which was so awesome that out of her 100 followers, 50 of them ended up sharing it on their respective feeds. And let's say each of those 50 had 100 followers each. Now, Ria's brand has got exposure to 5,000 people, 50 multiplied by 100, which are not her own. So this is not owned media. She's not paid for it. So it's not paid media, but it is earned media. So this 5,000 people she's got access to is earned media. Now, this is something that, again, as I said, brands do not focus enough on. Most brands, most startups focus on number one, owned media and paid media. They just think about regular organic stuff, or they think about spending money. They don't focus enough on earned media. Now, social media shares are a great way for you to drive earned media for your brand. Can you guys think of other ways in which you can create earned media? If you could type out your responses in the chat window. What are some of the other ways in which you can create earned media for your brand? Referrals, interesting. PR, yeah, that's a fantastic one, Monica. Thank you for that. So there are other ways in which you can create earned media for your brand. One other way is, of course, organic editorial PR. Let's say Ria gets featured in an interview in the Times of India or in the Economic Times, for example. Now her brand gets access to Economic Times' readership, which is not her own. It's not her own media. She's not paid for it. It's not an advertisement. It's pure editorial coverage. So something that she has earned because of the strength of her content or the strength of her brand itself, the strength of the work that she's done. So that again is a great example of, or a great means by which you can actually create earned media for your brand. The other way potentially is through third-party discussion sites and forums. Somebody spoke about referrals. That again is an interesting way for you to create earned media. The other way is also through third-party discussion sites and forums. Let's say that there is a discussion thread running on what are the factors to keep in mind for startup founders before they choose a payment gateway. For example, there is a Quora thread out there which has 25,000 views on it. Now, as a brand at Razorpay, I have the opportunity to very subtly insert my brand narrative there without being too salesy. Right. So I have the opportunity to add value to that conversation while still inserting my brand narrative in a very subtle fashion. Now that's a great way for me to create earned media for the brand. So the people who are viewing that thread are not my own followers. Those are not Razorpay's followers. I've not paid for it. I'm not running ads on Quora, but this is organic again, but it is still something that I've earned because I've added value to that particular conversation. That again is a pretty interesting way in which you can create earned media exposure for your brand. Some people spoke about hashtag trending activities. Fantastic one again. Just a few examples of hashtag trending activities at Razorpay. We've tried to crowdsource opinions on what are some of the various ways in which you as a business owner, as a marketer can unlock growth in the post-pandemic new world order, so to speak. And that's created a lot of earned media for the brand. Got a lot of participation from the Twitter universe in general. At Healthy Family, we have these New Year resolution campaigns that keep happening during the start of the new year. We're just a month away from that, by the way, interestingly enough, wherein we ask people what are their fitness and health and nutrition related resolutions for the new year. And that again creates a lot of earned media for the brand because the hashtag gets to trend because it's that time of the year. And I have here a couple of examples which were possibly some of the earliest examples of things actually going quote unquote viral, right? The term virality is very abused. But these were probably some of the earliest examples of things potentially going viral. The Gangnam Style was an example of something that went viral globally. Kolaveri D, for those of you who are aware, was one of the earliest examples of something actually going viral in India. It captured the imagination of the entire country. This happened almost 7-8 years ago. When digital was really booming in India, social media was taking off. And Kolaveri D truly captured the imagination of the country and the diaspora living abroad as well. Not a lot of people, not a lot of us are actually aware of some of the backroom workings that went into making Kolaveri D the hit that it actually became. Here's a quick sneak peek into some of the behind the scenes workings that went into making Kolaveri D the viral phenomenon it actually became.
How much money do you think is required to make a song world super hit? 10 million? 20 million? We spent zero. Close the mouth. I'll tell you how. First, we shot the making of the song and then added subtitles for all the non-Tamilians. Then the most important, we added the collar ringback tone code for making some pocket money. We then put up the video on our YouTube channel and then seeded it on social media platforms Facebook and Twitter. To get the audience watching and talking about our song, we created a hook, hashtag why this Kolaveri D, which is a commonly used phrase in my state, Tamil Nadu, when somebody irritates you. Next 3 days, full tweeting different irritating situations with the hashtag why this Kolaveri D, but we also added the link to our song with it. So people who could relate to that irritating situation clicked on the link, watched the song and forgot their irritation. They also understood the usage of the question, why this Kolaveri D? And then they started tweeting about things which frustrated them with the hashtag and also added the link to our song. Basically, people love venting their frustration on social media, and we use this insight to get hashtag Kolaveri trending on Twitter over 3 full days. Even people like Amitabh Bachchan ji and Anand Mahindra ji tweeted. The YouTube views kept on increasing. People were viewing, sharing. More than 41 million views across 220 countries. People love to ape a trend. So we put up a candid video of our own people singing the song in chorus, following which hundreds of people put in their own versions. Some even organized flash mobs, not just in India, even Netherlands and New Zealand. Oh, and by the way, the total caller ringback tones downloaded was 2 million and still counting. This brought us so much revenue that we are still counting actually. Okay, the enormous online buzz pushed even TV and print media to talk about the song. Articles were written on blogs, tabloids, and even newspapers. It was featured in news channels and music channels. Every radio station in the country played Kolaveri. In simple words, earned media is estimated to be more than 67 million rupees only. Money spent, zero. Mission accomplished.
Let's play a quick game of truth or dare. There was actually one thing that this person said which made a lot of sense. There was one other thing that this person said which is actually not quite accurate or true. Does anybody want to take some guesses on what the truth is? What is the not quite uh, true statement is? Any guesses? Yeah, I think some of you got it right. The fact that they had the hashtag, which was the why this Kolaveri D, which essentially served as a glue, which could link the product, which was a song itself, and it made it relevant and it could resonate with the masses. I think that was the really intelligent thing that they actually did. But the not quite true bit was this, right? The fact that they spent zero in actually promoting it. I know for a fact that that's not true. And that's true for almost all viral phenomena, even for Gangnam Style, right? You do need to spend an initial amount of money in paid marketing, in creating paid media exposure, so that your product gets exposure to that initial cohort of, or that initial critical mass of early adopters, so to speak. It needs to get that access to that critical mass of eyeballs after which, of course, the product being inherently good can take off, can potentially go viral, right? Where the crowd can take over. So you do need that initial paid marketing push before earned media can actually take over. That's something which is essential for almost everything that goes viral. It was the case, it was true for both Kolaveri D and for Gangnam Style. Obviously, the marketing dollars were not spent in regular channels like Facebook and Google advertising. It was spent in channels like influencer marketing, or in seeding content in specific properties, in specific portals, etc. So that's how they intelligently spend the marketing dollars in the initial days, to make it very subtle, to make it not appear completely promoted. And that was something which was very cool in what they had done in the initial days. After which, of course, the product was so inherently good that the crowd took over, and social media shares just started creating exponential numbers of earned media exposure, which was multiple times the kind of paid media exposure that they had already got. It's like very similar to a rocket which is looking to escape from Earth's gravitational pull. It needs to gain that initial escape velocity before it can, fly free. And it's very similar in this case. Well, for something to go viral, it still needs to that initial mass of paid media exposure before it can go potentially quote unquote viral. Yeah. That's all I had for you guys today. I hope you guys enjoyed this as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you. Would love to take any questions that you might have. Back to you, Ria. Okay, let me just see. There are a bunch of questions here which have come up in the chat. Valid links also plays a part in the search engine. Deepak has asked this question. Absolutely right, Deepak. So there are multiple things that go into determining, which go into the eventual decision of the Google's organic search ranking algorithm. It's called on-page SEO, which is the work that you do in terms of relevance, freshness of content, mobile user experience, optimizing it for speed, making sure your page loads really fast, etc. That is referred to as on-page SEO, the work you do on the page. Off-page refers to the work that you can do outside of the page, wherein you want to get a link back from a Times of India, from an Economic Times, which is considered to be a very authoritative source. You want to get a link back from that site to yours. So that also plays a part in Google's organic search ranking algorithms decision? Hope that answered your question, Deepak. Amrita has a question. Should we look for keyword trends on Google Trends? Google Trends is something that you can look at as well. But Google Trends only gives you directional pointers, or it will help you get a relative sense compared to something else because it's an index score on a scale of 0 to 100. Whereas Google Keyword Planner within AdWords gives you an absolute number. And that is essential for you to know whether you're mass or niche. So you need the Keyword Planner and not necessarily Google Trends to make this decision. Hope that helps you, Amrita. Deepak has a question. So we have done this over a period of time. Healthy Family, how did they actually capture these recipes and calorie counts? We used to follow a manual process for almost 2-3 years for actually capturing this entire database. So it was a manual, pretty intensive process that we had actually followed for actually getting this database ready. Hope that answered your question. It was a manually intensive process. When Vinita has a question, when you suggest Facebook, are you also including Instagram? Yes, Facebook, Instagram is included. Since Priyanka has a question, since the age group was diverse, how did Healthy Family target its first 100,000 customers? So Priyanka, that's what I said. So to begin with, we started off with a hypothesis on what the potential age group could be. But after some time, both Facebook and Google started optimizing the ad delivery to those age groups where there was a better fitment and better resonance. Right. And especially, and this worked especially more so on Google because we set the platform free and we were forced to because we had no control. And Google would make the decision on whom to serve the ad for and when. So all of our paid marketing efforts, by the way, were particularly focused on people who are on the older side of the age spectrum, not so much the youngsters. All of the youngsters, etc., would come through our organic efforts or ASO, App Store Optimization efforts, because the ROI, the bang for buck, was only on the older segment and not so much on the younger segment, because the younger segment was usually fit and or did not quite have the paying capacity, and it was the older people who are both unfit and had a greater paying capacity. Yeah, I hope that answered your question, Priyanka. I think I've answered Deepak's question already. It's a repetition of the same question. Priyanka has a question. Sustainable fashion, niche or mass, given it's a small percentage of people interested in it, but it's growing fast. So you've got to start off with the reality of today, Priyanka. So today, as of today, I would imagine sustainable fashion is still pretty much niche, especially in a country like India, maybe in a more developed market where there is greater awareness, maybe the Middle East, Dubai, potentially. By Middle East, I mean Dubai, or markets like Singapore, or say North America, Europe, Australia, etc. Maybe it's more mass, but at least in a country like India, I would imagine it's niche, but that's just my gut instinct. You would need to validate that with Google Keyword Planner. Vinita has a question. Would you say emails are still an effective means? Do people still read emails? I've been hearing about this for a while now, Vinita and everybody, that emails are dead. And I've been hearing about it now for, I think, more than 5, 6, 7 years. I don't think emails are going away anytime soon, at least for the next 5, 6, 7 years. People tell me that WhatsApp is going to replace emails. I don't think that's happening for 5 more years at least. And there are ways, however, in which you can improve your email delivery rate. So for example, I don't check my promotions inbox at all in Gmail, in my personal inbox. I check only my primary inbox. But as a brand, you still can adopt a set of best practices which can give or increase your chances of landing in the primary inbox. That's something which you can still do. So if you can make sure that your text to image ratio is really high, do not send image heavy emailers, stay away from some specific blacklisted keywords like offer, discount, promotions, etc. And of course, you can't do this all the time, but try to veer closer towards staying away from these kinds of keywords and increasing your text ratio. Experiment with plain text emailers every once in a while. The other thing is consciously, religiously, almost in a paranoid fashion, make sure that you remove people who are not engaging with your emailers from your emailing list. Let's say that Deepak and Lippy, they hate my emailers, but Arijit and Riya love my emailers. So, but if I still keep sending emailers to Deepak and Lippy continuously, what's going to happen is that all of the email servers are going to consider me as a spammer, and they will start pushing me to promotions and potentially even spam, even for the people who love my emails. Even for Arijit and Akash and Riya who love my emails, even for them, it might start landing in promotions or spam, right? So that's something for you to keep in mind. One best practice I always recommend is if there are people who have not even opened your previous 3 emailers, do not send them a 4th. Remove them from your email list so that your email sender score does not get impacted. If we follow some of these best practices, it maximizes your chances of landing in the primary inbox. I hope that answered your question, Vinita. Belinda says she's averse to marketing and try to keep mine authentic and genuine. Fair enough, Belinda, and that's testimonial and advertisement essentially is that. That was the approach that we followed at Healthy Family, wherein we had authentic retellings of our customers' life transformation stories. And we let that do the talking. Arijit has a question. Yeah, Arijit has a question, which is a fair question. I get this a lot from a lot of startup founders as to whether I should invest in paid marketing now or should I wait? This is a standard question that comes up a lot. One suggestion that I have is, so it depends, right? So one thing that I always tell startup founders, especially bootstrapped ones, which are running on shoestring budgets, is that you do not jump onto paid marketing's bandwagon till such time that you're actually ready, right? Spend more in creating organic and earned media exposure for your brand before you jump into paid marketing efforts. So that's something that I always encourage entrepreneurs to think of. I would tell you the same thing, unless of course there are other considerations at play. You want to get your initial cohort of early adopter customers, which could be 100, 500,000 customers within 3 months. You're looking to raise funds and you need to show some kind of scale for the venture capitalists to be interested. And you need to do that within a certain time window. You don't have the luxury of time. Unless it's things like that, I would not recommend going down paid marketing, jumping onto the paid marketing bandwagon. In your case, Arijit, I think you could potentially even try handcrafted products, etc. Again, given that your budget is limited, I think you might be better off starting off with, if you're say having a time consideration, there's a time factor at play, maybe start off with SEM, get that initial cohort of early customers, then make sure that you stop right there and you continuously keep focusing on SEO. SEO is more of a long-term play and you need to keep making investments there. I hope that helps, Arijit. Wish you all the very best in your business. Google's business profile, how much will it help an online business? Oh yeah, absolutely. It makes a difference because when you're searching for a business name, your profile, the number of reviews against the business plays a big part. So I would say do invest in that. Geeta has a question. So Geeta has a question. If somebody just visits and leaves, how do you know the details? There is something called as a cookie, Geeta, which essentially is a JavaScript file, which is downloaded onto that particular user system, which advertising and marketing networks can access or gain access to. And if you notice, a lot of websites, when you visit them, they ask you this question: this website uses cookies to personalize and improve your experience. Click OK to accept. If you click on accept, it means that they can track you even if they don't know your email ID or phone number. So let's say you're looking to book flights from Bangalore to Mumbai, for example. You went to Make My Trip, you decided not to book. You searched for Bangalore, Mumbai, but you didn't complete the booking. If you notice, you must be Make My Trip would be following you wherever you go on the World Wide Web with ads on, great deals on flights from Bangalore to Mumbai. That is a classic example of remarketing, which is based on cookies, so to speak. So you can stop this in multiple ways. One is obviously you don't give Make My Trip permission, to use your cookies. That's one. It's illegal for a brand to actually use your cookie information without you giving explicit permission. Although in India, people do take it for granted. It is implicitly assumed, unlike a lot of global websites where it is explicitly asked for. The other way in which you can remove this is you can clear your cookies yourself. You can clear your cache. You could go incognito, or you could use a different device or a different browser, because the cookie is specific to the device in browser. Let's say you start browsing from your phone, you won't get the same thing, unless of course there is a Chrome login, right? A Google Chrome login across both phone and device, in which case that goes away. I hope that helps, Geeta. Website's picture must work as your storefront photo. Absolutely, you're right. Harsh has a question. He wants to discuss his personal social media case study. I'll leave that to Ria's judgment. Word of mouth, Belinda, again, an interesting one for you to create earned media. Absolutely. Free trials, interviews. How do you get PR as a new startup? It's not easy. Priyanka has this question. It's a fantastic one. It's a very tough one. I think one of the ways for you to potentially get PR is try and come out with data points which would be interesting for a media person. Put yourself in the media person's shoes. What is the media person looking for? They are looking for interesting stories. And one of the things that they're hungry for is infographics, which is a combination of information represented in a graphical form, data represented graphically in an interesting form, which is packaged well, and which is coming from a credible, trustworthy source. Now, if you're an early stage startup, even if you give them interesting data points, the problem is nobody's going to trust you. Right? The media may not take you seriously. But what you can do to avoid that is you can run, for example, these kinds of hashtag trending efforts, right? Wherein you have an interesting topic around which the Twitterati starts contributing on. For example, if you are say a DigiGrad, you could potentially run a hashtag trending campaign which talks about hashtag New Year or career wish, for example, something that we did in one of my earlier EdTech adventures, wherein you actually source data, crowdsource data from the Twitter universe in general on what are people's aspirations for their careers for the upcoming new year, right? And once you have, because a lot of people are going to participate in something as trendy as that, you can package all of that information and you can go give it to the media person, say that this is not what I'm saying, this is not from my own database, this is what Twitter is saying. Why don't you use this? Why don't you package this, put it up on ET? Just give me credits for it. Say that credits to my brand name. That's one way in which you can, which is essentially a conversation opener, and it can get you a foot in the door. Yeah, I hope that helps you, Priyanka. Let me see if there are other questions. I think Deepak has the same question. I hope that answer in the previous response to Priyanka should apply in your case as well. I think Rhea wants to make her the host. Just give me one moment. Maitreyi has a question which I'm asked often in terms of what is the minimum amount of investment that a brand needs to make. I think that again is an interesting one. I think you can start off with as low as 5,000 rupees if needed. But I think the fundamental question you've got to ask yourself is, what is the size of my initial cohort of early adopters that is required for my business? And you need to work off that. So for example, you can run campaigns for as low as 5,000 rupees also. It doesn't matter. But you've got to ask yourself the more fundamental question on what is the size of my initial cohort of early adopters. Is it 500? Is it 100? Is it 50? Is it 1,000? And on that basis, you need to make that judgment. The good thing with digital is that you can make decisions in real time, right? You don't need to wait for a month for you to start seeing results. You can start seeing results immediately, and you can start making changes which will reflect in real time, which are some of the advantages. I hope that answered your question to whoever asked that previous question. Maitreyi, I hope wish you all the very best. I think I'm getting questions on PR again, which is, I think I've answered that question. Just give me one moment. Searching for Rhea here to make her the host. Yeah. Yeah, Rhea, I've made you the host again.
Hi, Ved. Yeah, so really sorry, I lost the connection in between and I was really not able to unmute also myself. So I just pinged you. Yeah.
No worries. No worries.
Thank you.
Just going through some of the other questions. What percentage of a startup's revenue is spent on ad or marketing budget? Usually one rule of thumb is not more than 25-30%. If you go beyond that, then it's going to become pretty risky. The other way for you to consider it is you've got to look at customer lifetime value to your cost of customer acquisition. So if you're spending 1 rupee in acquiring a customer, your lifetime value from that customer, which is measured as the net revenue impact from a gross margin perspective that customer can make on your business's P&L over a 3 or a 5 year time frame, that needs to be at least a 3 or a 4 or 5x multiple. So if you're spending 1 rupee in acquiring a customer, from a marketing perspective, in terms of marketing spend, you need to get at least 3 or 5 rupees in lifetime value in return over a 3-5 year time frame. Yep. Hope that answers your question. So Shruti, what I was saying essentially is Shruti's question: startup with 100 followers, should it focus on all three, owned, paid, and earned? I mentioned that you need to focus inordinately more on creating earned media. That is not an area of focus for a lot of startups and companies in India. That is what I wanted changed. Oh yeah, Fater, they've done a better job of earned media than Healthify, potentially. You could say that. Startup get to use the tools as they don't have data. So that's a little bit of a chicken and egg, Shruti. So you need, which is why as I go back to that popular term, that you need that initial cohort of early adopter customers, for you to actually have some kind of data, because it's a little bit of a chicken and egg. You'll have data only if you have customers. And for you to better target customers, you need data. So which means that you need to essentially go after those initial cohort of early adopter customers by running experiments, potentially. And once you have those set of early adopters, you can even do referral programs on top of that for you to build on top of, and have some data on the basis of which you can grow and scale further. I hope that answered your question. And Shruti has a question on what are the critical mass, what is the size of the critical mass? I'm assuming that's her question. How do you make that determination? Again, no easy answer for it. I think the critical mass size needs to be determined by, so what you've got to do is you've got to spend on paid marketing And you've got to always look for the equation of paid media exposure versus earned media exposure. The point where your earned media exposure starts exceeding your paid media exposure, that's when you've reached critical mass. So that number could happen. So if it's a product which has extremely high levels of virality embedded in it already, if it's a fantastic product, like in the case of Kolibri D or in the case of Gangnam Style, you could reach that stage very, very soon. You could reach that stage even when you've reached, say, just 30, 40,000 users, right? Your earned media could start overtaking your paid media exposure, and you could potentially even shut off paid media completely and the crowd will take over. But if the product sucks or if the product is really poor, earned media will never be greater than paid media. So that's something for you to keep in mind. So that's how you make the determination of when the critical mass is reached. I hope that answered your question, Shruti. How will I know if people have opened or not? Your mailing systems will give you that information. Geeta, marketing automation platforms will give you that information. So we used to actually have people input this data, Deepak, in terms of the calorie counts for various kinds of food recipes by actually having conversations with nutritionists. We had a team of nutritionists who actually used to input that data. Kritika has a question on amount to spend on marketing. I've answered that already. Should we invest time building visitors on our website when there is traffic already? On our website or on marketplaces where there is traffic already? That's an interesting one. I think in your early stages, I think it's all right for you to lean on marketplaces like Amazon and Flipkart. But one thing which I have come to know is that a lot of these marketplaces, almost 30% of their seller universes, also have independent brand presences outside of the marketplace as well, because you get to make better margins, better revenues. So once so it will help you get your initial cash flows in. If you're having a presence on the marketplace, you can focus on doing what you do best, which is your product, because the marketplace takes care of everything else. They take care of the payment gateway, the payments piece, they take care of logistics, they take care of everything. But they give you a lesser revenue share, obviously. But over a period of time, you can look to build your own brand. So you don't have to get the cookie per se. So all you have to do is, so if you're using a remarketing platform, Geeta, a Google remarketing or a Facebook remarketing platform, or there are various other specialists in the remarketing space, they will directly access the cookie. That's a feature that is already available, that comes built in with all of the browsers. Chrome, Safari, all of the browsers have this feature built in. Yep, that's fair enough. Organic takes so long, not necessarily so long. It takes you around 6-9 months, but you have to be patient. Good things take time. And ranking on Google's organic search results will take time, which is why one of the things for you to potentially do, Shruti, is if you were to use an organic SEO analytics tool, like say a SEMrush or a Ahrefs, right? So they also give you a sense of, one is the keyword demand pattern, and second is ranking difficulty. Now, there are keywords, for example, where there are well-entrenched players already in the market, they're already ranking for, it's going to be very difficult for you to break into that space. So what you do is you maybe focus on certain other niche keywords, which a lot of people may not be searching for, but you have a better chance of ranking. So for you to get some quick wins, which can also keep your motivation higher, you could focus on keywords where the search volume is lower, the competition is also lower, where your ranking difficulty, which is a metric that they also provide, is fairly low. So Richika has a question, how does hashtag help? How do we find the relevant hashtag? I think you've got to understand your customers really well. So for example, in the EdTech case, we used hashtag career wish because we know that people think about their career plans at the start of the year. We use New Year resolution because we know that people are thinking of New Year resolution. Do not get greedy and insert your brand name in the hashtag. That gets too salesy. Focus on hashtags that will resonate with your customer universe. Lipin has a question, should niche ethnic fashion bootstrap startups look for partnerships with other startups? Any other inputs? Partnerships is a great way for you to grow. And even at Razorpay, for example, we have a channel partner program, which is driving almost 25-30% of our acquisitions. It's one of our strategic bets. And partnerships essentially means that if you have a channel partner, it essentially means that you've got an extended salesperson outside of the four walls, of your organization, so to speak. And I think that is something that I would always recommend. Harsh has a question, how do we get in touch with you? I have a pretty unique name, so I should be pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. So please feel free to ping me, and I would love to network. Thank you, Vinita, and thanks for a lot of people who are, thanking me for the session. So Shruti has a question, Instagram is not working well for us in driving Dhanda. How can I change it? You've got to take a look at your category itself, Shruti. Make sure you follow that framework. Maybe Facebook is not the right channel for you. Maybe you're not using the right communication strategy. So do evaluate that. Twitter has got a lot of earned media. Yes, Harsh, you're right. They've done a lot of influencer marketing. It's not exactly earned. It is actually pseudo earned, so to speak, because they have actually influencer marketing. Nothing is free. Everything is paid for. So in a sense, it is actually paid media. One thing you consider vital, ignored by startups: earned media creation. Email marketing, best ones for email marketing, best platforms, Klaviyo. Yeah, that's a good one. Again, some of the platforms that I mentioned. So there are a couple of ways, right? There is marketing automation platform and there are email marketing platforms. Marketing automation platforms are like T20 specialists, right? They help you stitch together these intelligent rules on the basis of which you can send a series of these drip communications, and you also have platforms like MailChimp, which is probably the world's leading email sending platform, where you can send millions of emails at scale and have a good chance of it not landing in spam, right? That is a specialty of platforms like MailChimp. So you could also focus on platforms like these. So I would recommend a platform. So in your early days, when your scale is low, you could have your marketing automation platform also double up as an email sending platform at scale. Yeah, so that's something for you to think about. Methods to stand out in digital marketing. Priya has a question. Focus on media. That's fantastic, Harsh. You got a lot of press coverage. Wish you all the very best. Yep, Harsh, I will certainly check that link out. Cool. I think that's all of the questions. Back to you, Ria.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think it looks like we have covered all of our questions. So also thank you for answering all those questions of the participants. And it was also very great, insightful presentation and the session we had. It was also very good to have you in the panel as of now. So
cool. Thank you so much.
I'm going to share the feedback.
Sorry, please go ahead. Yeah, you're there?
Yeah, sure.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
I was just saying that I was going to share the feedback link in. Yeah. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So actually,
I think Ria's internet is breaking up. We can't hear you properly, Ria. I'm just going to fill in for you. I think Ria has just shared the feedback link for all the participants to fill in. So please do fill in the feedback by clicking on that link. I think it won't take more than 30-40 seconds of your time. And just to quickly wrap up, thank you so much for the opportunity once again to the DigiGrad team and to the Social Beat team. I really enjoyed the last hour and a half or so. I hope all of you enjoyed the last hour and a half as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you. Thank you so much for spending your Saturday evening here. I wish you all good health. Stay safe, take care, and love to stay in touch. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.